Okay, well, welcome everybody. Okay, again, everyone mute their microphones, please. Oh, let's see. Okay. Liana, will Robin be joining us?
He is trying to join right now. I went and he was looking for the link and I.
No. Yep, the old having to look through several weeks of emails to find the exact one. Always a lot of fun.
I'm here. I'm not a presenter, just to let everybody know that I'm Robin, my husband, is presenting, and he wanted to have a woman's perspective to chime in now and then, maybe. So I'm just here.
Hello, Robin. Okay. Hello. Okay, since I think we've got everyone on board right now, and I'll keep on letting people in as they pop up. We'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to how can you call Thanos wiping out half the universe and its restoration a blip? The marvelous insights and secrets and depths of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So it'll be a freewheeling discussion today about various issues. So I think Robin had mentioned he wanted to start out talking about an accusation or a statement made by Martin Scorsese, legendary Hollywood director, a number of months ago, saying that the Marvel Cinematic Universe wasn't really very deep. It wasn't, all that profound.
Yeah, I have his comments. I mean, I can actually read them, and we can talk about it a little bit. But yeah, I just decided. Thanks for inviting us, David. It's great to come and talk to you about something that I think we all love, including a lot of the students. We get some more people, right? But it's a really fun thing to talk about. But it's also a serious thing to talk about, and there's a lot that can be said about the superhero genre, and maybe a lot of people don't give it a whole lot of respect sometimes, but I think at least it deserves discussion. Right? That doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with us, right? We're all advocates. Yeah. We all love the superhero genre. We like these movies. We like Pulp Fiction. I know that's two of the three of us. But let's just call up my questions here real quick.
It does help to keep in mind that a lot of things that were considered popular culture in the past are now considered classic.
Oh yeah, of course.
I mean, for example, Shakespeare in his era was popular culture.
Right. You didn't
with Edgar Allan Poe.
Be talking about it in classes. I'm sorry. What were you saying, dude?
Yeah, it was just like Charles Dickens, Edgar Allan Poe. They were considered popular culture in their day. Of course. Yeah, and I suspect the same will probably happen with the Marvel movies, that they will eventually have an incredible reputation 50 or 60 years from now.
Yeah, at least some of them, right?
Maybe.
There's a lot there, and I as a fan of comic books, I love comic books, but I would say, maybe 1 out of 10 is really, doing something that's interesting. The other 9 comic books are doing something I've seen before with a different. I was just saw an interview with Quentin Tarantino where he was sort of describing TV and maybe even comic books as serials as sort of disposable, and that's true for a lot of that material, but not all of it. Not all.
No.
Of it. Yeah. Well, anyway, my first question for everybody is just, before going into any analysis, what do you think these has made these Marvel films so successful, and what makes the genre so popular? Why do these stories speak to us? Any thoughts?
Well, I think it's the uniqueness of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's brand that it's it's really had achieved a consistency that other comic book movies have not. It's the idea that Marvel Studios was created at first by Marvel Comics, the first time a comic book company actually started a movie studio.
Yeah.
And so in the creation of Marvel Studios, they wanted to focus on making sure they stayed true to the characters. But they hired Hollywood professionals to make the movies, but there was close oversight to make sure that they stayed true to the comic book characters. And just as the reason for the initial popularity of Marvel Studios or Marvel Comics was in fact that the characters that Marvel Comics, Stan Lee and others were creating were human beings, and they appealed to people's emotions, like Peter Parker being a consistent loser all the time and being picked on, yet he's this great superhero, and then making human mistakes, the most tragic one being, of course, the death of his Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
Fantastic Four, they have great powers, but they also have limitations. For all his genius, Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards, can't cure Ben Grimm, his best friend, of looking horribly ugly. Iron Man only being able to stay alive. Yeah. And they took all of those things that made up the characters great, but when Stan Lee and others created them, and transferred them to the movies. Yeah. And gave the movies almost a sense of them being comic books in and of themselves, as one story moved into another. And it would be like the post-credit scenes were like the final panel teasing the next big storyline. And so it developed an interconnection between them.
It's a comic strategy. Yeah. I mean, and it works. Yeah.
And the characters had such amazing depth to them. They were believable. I mean, the psychological aspects of the Marvel Universe characters are one of their stronger points.
Yeah.
That unlike other comic book stories where something major happens and then a year down the line it's completely forgotten. These characters carry the scars with them. Like Tony Stark in the aftermath of Avengers and Iron Man 3 having post-traumatic stress that he nearly lost his life. And making these characters,
alcoholism, they took that out, right? But in the comic books for a long time, when I was a kid and was reading Iron Man, he's struggling with his addiction, right? And he makes lots of terrible mistakes in the process.
Yeah, they did a little bit of that, I think, but not. It wasn't one of the central focuses on the story. But Robert Downey Jr. was the perfect person to kind of touch on that, because of course he battled his own addictions.
Sure.
And Tony Stark is really what brought his career back and fully resurrected it. So he was kind of the perfect Tony Stark, and he could understand this character from the movies.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, the actor actually relates better to the Iron Man story than maybe the Iron Man that you get in the movies. Right?
Yeah.
Real problems with addiction. Yeah. I was going to say something. I'm sorry.
I wanted to add one thing about the question that you asked: why are they so popular, these movies? And I think with the comic books, well, we're not in such a reading culture anymore. Of course, just people read it less. Even comic books seem to be work to go through them, maybe. But there's still a need for those heroes, I think. For one, what I think is that there's a direct line to the old mythologies that fill the same slot in society with the need for heroes, and also one connection to the old mythology, such as the Greek mythology, of course, but also Norse mythology. Those heroes were also humanized. They also had flaws. They also were relatable. And at the time when people believed that they existed, they thought that their life was ongoing, just like humans. And that with these comic book heroes, they're also, because the story is ongoing and you never know what will happen, especially since the movies modify some of the comic books, so you don't know necessarily what's going to happen. That gives the illusion that they're alive, that their life is going on parallel to yours, and you can always see what they've been up to. So it's almost like they're right there. You can relate to them even more because you think that they exist in real time.
Maybe the character deaths also matter more in the movies than they do in the comic books. I mean, Iron Man is always dying and coming, like almost every character in the actual comics is constantly dying and being reborn for some reason or another, or there's a variant, or, you know, maybe in the Marvel films, they managed to make you connect with the actors and the characters because, you know, I hope, right, we don't see Robert Downey Jr. again. That way, you know, his performance stands, right, in this cycle of films.
And it, of course, it's that's also the difference of having the movies, is that the actors are actually getting older. It's not like, you know, Tony Stark, introduced in 1961, still could look young in the comic books because, you know, time is fungible there and you're drawing art. But in real life, as he's played by an actor, you know, he gets. Okay. Just needed to do a quick mute there. It's tougher to resurrect the characters in the movies now. I mean, they can be recast. So, for example, one of the characters that will most certainly have a lot going on in the future for Marvel is Wolverine. But Hugh Jackman, of course, is now up there in years, and so he's not going to come back to the role in all likelihood. Or if he could, or if he was willing to, he couldn't do it long term. And so even though he was a definitive Wolverine, you can't really cast him if you're going to redo the character and start them over. And, you know, for example, you know, choosing after the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman, you know, Black Panther, unexpectedly, the decision not to recast T'Challa, to have him stand forever as that Black Panther and not bring, I mean, there's plenty of very, very good African-American actors or actors of color who could have come in and played that role. But, you know, his passing has more, you know, feels more impactful into the MCU with, you know, having the Black Panther mantle passed on and creating a new Black Panther, have someone else step in and carry that role. Yeah, it gives a sense of it being more real and believable and powerful that way. You know, and taking their time in telling stories. You know, Marvel Studios didn't rush to make a Black Panther film. They waited until his character could be properly introduced. And some of the background in Wakanda could be brought in. And that's another thing too. Marvel always, for the most part, has really good stories and scripts. They know how to balance out comic book stories and the exact right amount to take from various comics runs and put them in, and they'll change what they need to. Aunt May in the comics sure as hell ain't Marissa Tomei. If Aunt May was comics accurate for the Tom Holland, Happy Hogan courting her would be really, really creepy because she'd be some really, really old woman. But Aunt May is a more interesting character in the MCU when she's younger. It adds new dimension to it.
Yeah.
You take a look at other comic book movies where they try to do too much for whatever reason, like Wolverine Origin. I remember I couldn't watch that film because there was like 10 different comic stories squashed into one, and none of it made sense. It
was kind of a
Batman versus Superman, another one where although the intention was good, the people at Warner Brothers wanted too much at once, and so it ended up being a complete. If you watch the full thing, it's okay, but there's just too many stories, and Marvel's always been able to balance that. They're willing to take risks. Each film is different. It feels different. Ant-Man isn't the same as Guardians of the Galaxy, which isn't the same as Captain America. Civil War. WandaVision isn't the same as Loki. Now that they're doing the TV shows.
David, why do you think that the DC films, when I was a kid, everybody loved those characters certainly just as much as the Marvel characters. Why do you think Warner Brothers has kind of fumbled the ball on a lot of these films? At least that's my opinion. I mean, I personally agree with your assessment that these Marvel films are successful because the studio is very careful about how they layer the films, connect the films. But I feel like the DC films haven't really worked for me. They're grim. They're often, verging on humorless. I mean, there are a lot of great actors. I like seeing the characters. I like parts of these movies, but overall, I don't think they're as successful. I mean, there's some good ones.
No, they've never been able to maintain a consistency, and I've always summed it up like this. There's a big difference between a comic book company that created its own movie studio, Marvel, and a movie studio, Warner Brothers, that owns a comic book company, DC Comics. Marvel, I think a lot of it comes down to that Marvel Studios was willing to be patient. They didn't go right away for the Avengers. They waited a couple of years till all of the characters, including the major villain for the first Avengers film, had been introduced, whereas plus Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige are really work diligently to make sure everything works, whereas DC has more of a just go out there and make it. I mean, I've done a lot of work on the talking about Zack Snyder's Justice League and the Snyder Cut, and that is so much better than what Warner Brothers the theatrical version of Justice League, where it was basically Joss Whedon's film. And they told a story that the head of Warner Brothers Pictures at the time they decided to go and create the DC Extended Universe said to Zack Snyder, here's a list of titles. Go and make them. You're going to have 5 movies that you direct: Man of Steel, Batman versus Superman, and then 3 Justice League films. We want them all to link together, but you can't consult with the people making Wonder Woman or Suicide Squad. Now go make them all connected and make it successful. That was it. Whereas Kevin Feige has now Marvel Studios has a team that meets every day and makes sure that all the projects are working together and, have all their ducks in a row. Whereas DC, it's like, here's some titles, go make it work.
Maybe the Zack Snyder, so many young fans are into the video game, right? Injustice, right? Injustice 2. That's an interesting storyline. It's pretty dark. I mean, for me, for childhood me, it's kind of sad to see Superman turn into a villain, but maybe that it speaks to the times, right? But, at least the Injustice plotline is a more interesting one than what they've put out so far. So
well, a lot of time it's also that when Marvel Studios brings in and producers and directors and works with them, whereas Warner Brothers, there's constant studio interference, and a lot of times that studio interference is contradictory.
Right.
At first, they wanted Zack Snyder to make their films distinct from the MCU, so he went and made them darker, like Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy which is one of the things what the Warner Brothers. Yeah, and then after Man of Steel, they go, oh my God, this is too dark, so make it lighter. And no, it's too light, make it darker. And they're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, you know. And historically, Warner Brothers DC movies will start off really good, like Superman the movie with Christopher Reeve. Superman 2 is really good. Then the studio wants to make them on the cheap, and the quality falls off the bottom. Batman Returns with Michael Keaton. Then the studio wants to make more money. Bottom falls out.
Yeah. The sequelitis, just making sequels, which is almost the same exact film.
Yeah,
as opposed
and
kind of
they don't stay true to the original creation. But you know, Kevin Feige has said, and it's true, he models all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and tone are inspired by Superman the movie, because Kevin Feige learned how to create comic book movies on the set of the X-Men films, which were executive produced by Richard Donner. And Richard Donner, of course, was the one who directed Superman the movie. So Kevin Feige always gives the late Richard Donner credit for that. That Marvel knows how to mix humor and action, and the films always have lighthearted moments, even the most tragic ones, like in Infinity War, one of the extremely harsh endings. But Infinity War has some of the funniest moments in the MCU, but that makes that when the tragedy happens, it's even it hits more powerfully. Whereas, you go with Batman versus Superman, because they were trying to do so much at once, a story that shouldn't have left a dry eye in the house with the death of Superman, which was a very powerful story in the 1990s, didn't work. You just kind of in the movie, who cares?
Yeah.
And Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, which Sony made. There was the death of Gwen Stacy is one of the all-time most powerful Spider-Man stories, and it still resonates in the comic book to this day. But in the movie, there were just so many villains and so much going on that the audience didn't really feel that tragedy that should have been first and foremost. Yeah. Whereas in something like Logan, it's a very tightly plotted movie. Yeah, so you really feel it when these characters pass, like Professor X, played so brilliantly by Patrick Stewart, or when Logan passes in the film. I think I can give spoilers for that now, since it's been out several years.
But I think that what makes that film work is the tremendous skill of those actors, right? Who really embody those characters. And maybe that's a flaw too about some of the casting choices for DC. Logan is also well written. I think it tells a powerful story. It's more than just a superhero film, right? The characters are not interchangeable. I kind of hope Marvel goes back to that alternative history at some point. I'd like to see another movie set in that kind of dark future. Liana brought up the point about mythology, I was, as I was trying to think about what we would talk about today, I went and looked at a couple quotes from Joseph Campbell, who's always trotted out when we talk about mythology and superheroes. So I figured, why wouldn't I do that too? And it's an interesting quote. Myths are public dreams. Dreams are private myths, and this idea of myth as a public dream, I kind of like that idea. What do you guys think? Like the mythology as public dream.
You want to go? Yeah. I think that's
one way to try to think about this. This quote is just the idea that the superhero film is a public dream, right? This idea that the superheroes we have are sort of a reflection of our ideals or our fears about the time. Like, do you think that the quality of these, in terms of the moral character of the heroes, I think it's very different than Superman the movie. When I was a kid, what do you think about the kind of darker tone? I mean, I mentioned it before in relation to Batman versus Superman, or Logan for that matter, the Punisher series. Deadpool, right, who sort of kills with sort of sociopathic disengagement from its targets, at least in the comic book, toned down a little bit in the movies. Do you think that some of the critics out there are right that we should be concerned about these hyper-violent vigilantes?
I'm going to speculate that people don't think that, for example, sorry, I have planes flying around me now. That maybe they're afraid that, kind of the 50s type of hero, the one that was so wholesome and everything,
and also
that
very,
led
very
into
white,
the
very white
Superman, that it's not edgy enough for today, because today we're more complex and people expect movies to be less Hollywood type of nice story with the boa on top, right? And more tragedy, more human. But then it gets darker and darker. And we've been going through some wars. Maybe that's one thing that reflects in the movies we watch now, that we expect more death to be presented because supposedly it's more real to us. And instead of going to watch the war happening, we watch the show or movie, and we feel as if we're part of the action.
Kind of like the post 9/11 culture that's
and
been
post 9/11, yeah. I mean, I was so disturbed in Batman and Superman that one of the most striking images to me was buildings collapsing left and right, and that it was normalized. I guess we watched those images of the Twin Towers falling so many times that now it's not disturbing anymore. It's just, that's what happens. So I guess it does reflect the times, and we kind of lost our innocence that we were holding on to maybe when Christopher Reeve version of Superman appeared. And maybe Christopher Nolan upped the ante with his Batman version, who became more of a humanized, tragic character rather than just black and white, or somebody who just goes and does good things, or is much more tormented than Superman from the past, for example, or Batman from the past. So they want to make them deeper, but maybe they go too far when they make them too dark. I really love the Christopher Nolan Batman. That's kind of, I didn't grow up with the comic books. I come from a country where we didn't have them. So all I knew was from some of the movies. So I just couldn't get into the comic books much as an adult to try to go back. I felt like I missed out when I was at the right age to get into all of it. So with the movies, I was kind of drawn in. But if the movie is good, it draws me in. And then Robin tells me what happens in the actual comic book. And it's interesting to make that comparison, but I haven't read many of the comic books myself, except some Superman ones when I was little. And I went to another country and I got some. So I was excited to have those, yeah. But long story short, I think it's the age right now that we feel maybe that more dramatic things are happening around us and darker things are happening around us, and we've gotten more used to maybe death being around us and part of our society. And so it would sound like a lie to make the movies too cheerful.
Sure.
But I think, of course, they should give hope. That's one thing that we look for in these movies. And if they're too grim, then people, I think, will stop watching.
Yeah.
Are we able?
Well, I think. I think with Marvel, the characters inherently were darker when they were created because they all had flaws to them.
Right.
Like, the Hulk was, could be as strong as Superman, but he was always on the edge of being out of control. He wanted to be left alone. He didn't want to necessarily be the hero. He wanted to be
anger management problem, right?
Yeah, and so a lot of the Marvel stories had darker roots, but the darkness didn't necessarily dominate. But there was the notion that in order to accomplish something, truly significant, sometimes sacrifices had to be made. And we get that, of course, with the entire Infinity Saga, especially with Infinity War and Endgame, where certain characters in there make the ultimate sacrifice. But the ending is still very hopeful because all the destruction, for the most part, was, at least to a degree, reversed. And there's a chance for healing. It'll still be a rough road, but there's a far better chance than what the end of Infinity War was promised. There's a lot of times hope for some redemption, even from the most hardcore of characters. Like Loki, he goes from just being the god of mischief and a bad guy to a genuinely complex character who actually sacrifices his life to protect his brother in Infinity War. He wasn't very good at it, but he's not used to that kind of thing. He's too used to being a villain and getting away. So, but the Loki series was really brilliant at showing that transition.
Yeah.
The Winter Soldier, Bucky,
definitely.
Bucky Barnes used to be one of the taboo characters that would never come back. He was one of the few that actually stayed dead. But the comic book writer Ed Brubaker came up with a brilliant idea of having him, how to bring him back. And that was as a Russian assassin. And so he's a very dark character, yet he finds his way back toward the light. And he atones for what he did. But he also, because of what he did in the past, he pushes Tony Stark, Iron Man, to go to a very dark place where Iron Man passes judgment on somebody even though he's different. And of course, that's exactly the kind of sin that he accused Steve Rogers of doing. So they have these moral complexities and dark sides, but they also have light sides that try to work toward being good and being better. Who would have predicted that the person who made the sacrifice at the end of Endgame would have made that sacrifice in the first movie? And that's part of course, what it made it so powerful, is that these characters always do have flaws and we can relate to them. Superman, I think, in the Christopher Reeve films represents the ideal, somebody who we can all inspire to want to be. But in the modern era, especially since, the Comics Code Authority was thrown out, DC had kind of adjusted their characters to have a harsher side to them. The question is that of course, that can go too far. One recent DC movie that did work was The Suicide Squad that James Gunn directed. Yeah. That was really, really good, but Warner Brothers and DC has burned so many of its bridges that it didn't do well. And that's another,
because those characters were so flawed, right? Because they had so much baggage, right? I think that made it work, right? And that's the anti-Superman, right, sort of story.
Yeah, and another thing that I think really makes the Marvel characters stand out and the MCU stand out is that they always respect their fans. They respect the viewers. They don't insult them. You know, they work as hard as possible to make these movies good. I mean, I remember there was it wasn't Martin Scorsese, but some other director was saying, oh, we can't make brainless movies anymore. Fans are expecting too damn much anymore. It's unfortunate that we can't make any brainless movies and be successful like they were. And it's like, you deliberately want to make bad movies in the hopes they'll be successful? Don't you want to make better movies? You know, because you'll attract a bigger audience that way. Yeah, that dictates, like, you know, I'm constantly amazed that Warner Brothers constantly calls their fans toxic or tries to drive them away. And it's like, I don't know how you survive in business if you drive your fans away. Marvel, the MCU is one of the few things I can think of where the audience is expanding.
I guess one question I have, though, just to interject for a second, is just, you know, what do you two think? I mean, I feel like the fan cultures for a lot of these entertainments are kind of out of control sometimes. I mean, you know, they are not. A movie is a complicated product made by a lot of different people. And suddenly the fans are like trashing these films like almost before they come out, taking, you know, sort of pseudo political or pseudo culture warrior stances towards the film. I feel like the fan culture, I mean, the internet's given rise to all of these fan cultures, and there are a lot of things that are wonderful about them, but I feel like maybe it's a little bit, you know, out of control, right? You know, I never agreed with George Lucas's kind of disdain for his fans and what they wanted, like never releasing the movies that I saw in the theaters. But on the other hand, I sort of feel like there's something to what he was talking about. He's the guy who created the story. He should have some say in how that story gets presented. And I don't think just giving fan service all the time is the right way to approach a work of art, or to make a great movie. You can't just please everybody's preconceptions about the character. That's going to kill it. I mean, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think that there is there a percentage of fans that are out of control? Yes, and sometimes they have a louder voice than anybody else because, you know, they have the YouTube channels, and those who want to criticize something and create this myth about it will go and feature will take the statements and claims by a relatively small, a small percentage of the out of control fans and apply it to everybody. And it's also, people are trying to figure out and adjust what's the line now? When do you cross the line? How much is too much? So, for example, when people, send, Zack Snyder fans send death threats to Warner Brothers, of course, that's way over the line. But to say, doing a hashtag, restore the Snyderverse, give us 2 more Zack Snyder Justice League movies, that's not bad. That's just a request.
Sure.
Criticizing the mistakes of executives is not toxic. It can be if you do it insultingly, but at the same time, if somebody's doing something foolish or does something dumb, maybe they should be called on it. Like Zack Snyder related a story about Man of Steel, where they had been meeting 90 minutes with Warner Brothers executives, and they finished up the presentation and they described the complete plot, and they ended with, and then Superman uses his ship to destroy General Zod's ship, thus bringing the story full circle of the ship that his father built to save him is used to end the threat of General Zod, who helped destroy Krypton. And one of the executives goes, well, you can't put that in there. And Zack Snyder and the other writers kind of looked at him and go, why? Well, if you destroy Superman's spaceship, how is he going to get back to Krypton? The guy literally did not know that, or he wasn't listening. I don't know what the hell he was doing, but I mean, everybody knows Krypton explodes, right? And this guy he was listening to the whole presentation. He goes, but how will Superman get back to his planet? Superman doesn't have a planet to go back to, ya yuts. I mean, I heard that the first time. I was like, are you kidding me? How do these folks have jobs? It's like the NBC executive that said about The Walking Dead, we love it, but does it have to have all these zombies?
Well, they're not fans, right? They're
Yeah.
Primarily. That's what the bottom line is, what they're working on. I don't blame them for it, right? You know, somebody's got to do that work. It's hard work.
And it's tough to find the balance because sometimes fans will raise their own expectations. So, for example, with WandaVision, there was like, oh, Doctor Strange is going to appear, Professor X is going to appear, Wolverine is going to appear, and then none of them appeared. But they couldn't deny it and say, no, they're not going to appear because they didn't want to give away anything about the ending. And then when they didn't appear, the fans are like, oh, this is so disappointing. Professor X didn't appear. Doctor Strange didn't appear. It's like, you're the one that expected him to appear. Kevin Feige never said, watch out for a surprise guest appearance at the end of WandaVision. Or watch out for a surprise guest at the end of Loki. You know, just because that happens in the movies where you sometimes have surprise appearances doesn't mean it's going to happen in every film. And, you know, get over it. You know, don't create your own expectations and then get mad when those expectations aren't met. It's kind of, you know, so fans are, of course, the lifeblood of any entertainment business. There was a comic book writer, you know, who was talking about kind of the more political attitude that showed up in comics today. And she literally said, well, if readers don't want to read my comic, then don't. We don't need you. I don't need you. It's like, well, if you alienate enough of them, you won't have a comic book to write anymore because it'll be canceled.
Just happened. I forget some of the recent. I don't keep up with like print comics as much as I did once.
But I just wanted to say something that, I mean, what I find the most toxic in fan culture, you know, I don't even want to call it cancel culture because I don't think it's the same thing. But what these culture wars that involve the fans, that fans kind of drive, or they initiate these backlashes toward movies and comic books, when all the writers today and the producers, the directors, they want to include more diverse characters. You know, they try to become more woke, let's say, to keep up with the times because the times are changing. But the hardcore fans sometimes are more old-fashioned and more misogynistic, maybe more even racist, and they start trying to boycott these movies and comics because they don't want more diversity. They're opposing to any character that supposedly whatever character comes out as gay or somebody that is replaced by a Hispanic or black version of that character, and immediately it's almost as if they murdered the character. And so then they threaten, and they you know, it's very popular these days to have death threats, to get death threats for whatever you're doing wrong according to the fans,
which is crazy.
So that pressure is horrifying because it means that, you know, the entertainment industry is run by the fans instead of the people who are the artists. So the art cannot be dictated by the fans.
And this is sort of a tangential
humorous
point, but like I was just going to say, I was very troubled just as a fan of these characters and the sort of heroic story that this medium is good for. I was terribly disappointed and disgusted to see the Punisher logo, Captain America, Superman, on display on January 6th. And, I mean, that bothered me to see those characters being appropriated for that purpose. But, once the character is out there in the world, we're not responsible for how they're appropriated.
but
Yeah, and every side, everything has been so politicized to the extreme now. It's some folks aren't able to kind of separate, what's good storytelling from politics. It's diversity is very good, but it should also be accompanied by a very, very good story. So, like, for example, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I thought that was one of the best approaches that I had seen to looking at the issue of race and racial politics. That it looked
they handled it very carefully, right? They were very careful.
It was acknowledged as being, it was the complexity of it. And I liked how they introduced the African-American man who had been given the super soldier formula. And that had been a great comic book story, Red, White, and Truth. And I liked how they had brought that in and used that as a spring for discussing racial issues, and it was handled so very well.
And also experimentation on Black people, right, in the 50s and 60s, right, by the military.
Yeah, it brought up very relevant issues, factual issues, but it also said, however, there's a lot of problems out there, but that doesn't mean that we should just give up and quit trying to fight, that we should continue to work toward that. And, that's why I love when Falcon took up the shield and officially becomes Captain America. And because the nature of the medium is different in terms of movies versus comic books, Anthony Mackie will stay as Captain America for a while, whereas in the comics, it eventually goes back to Steve Rogers. But, Steve Rogers is Chris Evans. And so if he doesn't want to come back, then the shield is definitely going to, of course, stay with Anthony Mackie and Falcon. And Marvel didn't race to introduce the first female-led superhero movie. Part of that, of course, was that they didn't necessarily have a female character that had the prominence of a Wonder Woman. But they introduced Captain Marvel when the time was right, and it worked for the storyline. And they're bringing in more and more female characters now, and more diverse characters, because now they've gotten to a point where they can do that. And you have a built-in audience who will watch it. Some of them might not like the results. Like, there's a number of people that have criticized the Eternals for that. I haven't seen the movie yet myself, but I think the majority of fans, though, are going to be much more accepting of it. I think one of the things fans don't like is that when the politics and messaging overwhelm the story, like the female Ghostbusters attempt, where they just had a bunch of actresses cast as the Ghostbusters, but there was no connection to the previous one.
Yeah.
And so it's just
it works against the idea of introducing a strong female character to just kind of have what I would describe as tokenism, right? Where you just think, well, let's just make the whole cast with women or the whole cast with target minority group. That's not a very sophisticated way to deal with the situation.
No.
Liana,
okay.
Saying something?
Well, I was just going to make the point, there's that scene in Avengers Endgame where all the female heroes are walking together. And yeah, that's pandering, but it could also be, it was also a setup to hopefully have a exclusively female superhero team. There was a comic book like that called A-Force, but they haven't done it yet because they're still working on trying to figure out, how do we do this in terms of the story? How do we tell this story? How do we, justify having all these female heroes get together without any males present? And I think they'll do it eventually. It's just they want to find the right story. They just don't want to say, like with Doctor Who, for example. I used to be a huge Doctor Who fan. I can't watch it anymore. Jodie Whittaker is a great actress. Chris Chibnall, the showrunner, was a great, he did brilliant detective show called Broadchurch. But they tried to go political with Doctor Who, and it just didn't work. They're both really good, but messaging took the place of storytelling, and it really devastated the franchise and really never gave Jodie Whittaker a chance to make the Doctor role her own. And so, I think Marvel has that right balance where you introduce the female heroes gradually, like Miss Marvel introducing a Muslim superhero. And she'll then go into Captain Marvel too, the Marvels, along with Photon, who's the female African-American hero. Who was also called
in WandaVision, right? Is that the character in WandaVision?
Yeah. She was actually the leader of one of the Avengers teams in the 1980s for one of their most memorable stories. Then she kind of faded from view, but I'm glad that they brought her back and are giving her a major role. I hope it stays there, because she was a damn good superhero. She just kind of got lost when the former Miss Marvel then became Captain Marvel.
What I think is that they should not be afraid of the backlash. I mean, maybe there will be hit or miss reactions, but I think the more exposure the public has, the more this prejudice that it has to be a man's world will go away. And I just it reminded me of the fact that when Voyager started, that's just Star Trek. It's a different universe, but anyway, it's similar because of the fan culture. When suddenly Star Trek had a female captain with Captain Janeway, there was a huge backlash at the beginning, and how dare they put a female in charge and all that, and because in the military women were not in charge either. So as the more the military itself started to accept, I'm not saying that Star Trek is necessarily a military show, but there's a little bit of a parallel. But when Janeway became so popular, now people don't even think twice about her being legitimate in her role and being a really awesome character. There's a similar backlash with Discovery that there's a black female hero, or she's not exactly she's not a captain. She's almost like an anti-hero because she's
she is a captain. She is a captain now, technically, after the third season.
Captain, yeah.
Oh, okay, but she started out as a criminal, and even though, of course, it was an ambiguous reason for her to be. Yeah. But there's still backlash, and there will be backlash. But the more they offer the story and make it powerful, the more people start accepting. I mean,
all the young girls were inspired by some stories. Yeah.
With Carrie Fisher, that was one of the first powerful female characters, and I'm sure some people are upset that what was Princess Leia doing, being side by side with the guys and fighting. So to this day, some people react badly to Leia having too much power. In the last movies, people were upset that she was flying through the universe or something. And I was thinking, why are you upset? She still has the Force. I mean, just because she's a woman, if Luke Skywalker had been flying through air, not air, through vacuum
Mm.
space. It would have been fine because he's Luke, but why people were upset? Why were people so upset about Leia? So I think the more characters they create and the more powerful they make them, the more people will start, they will normalize it. So I think the backlash is because it's still not seen as mainstream or normalized. Even in real life, people still don't necessarily fully accept women in the military and or gay people in the military, things like that. So the more we accept it in the world, the more we accept it, or the other way around. I mean, these heroes create role models, and we need role models in every shape, size, and gender, and everything.
I really like the way Marvel movies handled Miles Morales, right? And I think that people love that character. He was introduced in a way that I think was really effective. I mean, that was a great movie, right? Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah.
And I think it's the quality of the work.
One of the best Spider-Verse movies, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you do it well, then it's not, just cheap corporate tokenism or here's, my target demographic. And, the Miles Morales character is a really compelling character, right? Which I think is a lot of different things.
And he developed naturally into the role, both in the comics and in the Spider-Verse movie. It's, and you can see that kind of tokenism still with Warner Brothers, where it's like, we're going to have a movie set in the 1930s that redefines Superman, where Clark Kent will be African American, or actor of color. I guess you can't say African American for Clark Kent because he's from Krypton. So, technically he's not going to be, he's neither African nor American because he's from a different planet. In terms of story.
It doesn't matter what color Superman's skin is, doesn't seem
and that's fine. I just hope that they tell a really good story along with it. Yeah. And I mean, you see this in the CW TV shows. They say they're for diversity, yet they cut the legs off really successful shows that feature diverse superheroes. Like Black Lightning was supposed to be really, really good, but they canceled it. It wasn't doing badly in the ratings. Why the hell did they cancel it? It features an African-American superhero. There was going to be a spin-off series with a couple of his daughters being, they'd be African-American female superheroes, but they just said, nope, we're not going to go along with it. Batwoman's a lesbian, but nope, sorry, we're changing roles and we're going to cancel the show after the 3rd season. I mean, DC has, they own the Milestone universe, which was an entire universe of African-American superheroes in a distinct city. And one of them was very popular, Static Shock. For a variety of reasons, the comic book line got canceled, but they had all these characters that they own. Yet their idea is, hey, let's have an African-American Superman or a Val Zod, who's a different universe Superman of color. Why can't you do some of the superhero characters that you own that are already there?
Sure.
Black Panther is one of the most successful. I mean, it's a complete tragedy that the actor's not there anymore. But they're going to use the other characters to come back to the story.
Yeah. And that's a great example of how to bring, quote unquote, African American culture or African society or cultural tropes into the Marvel universe. And I thought it was incredible looking, right? I mean, they did an amazing job world building for Black Panther. Yeah. And, that's a movie that I think will still inspire kids for years to come, just like the original Superman.
Sister's going to be the main character now. Robin was telling me that it's the sister now that is going to be the focus of the movie.
That's what they're saying. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I hope.
Or Killmonger might come back and it'll become a redemption story for him. I also read that they're going to create a character of T'Challa having a son. There'll be a time jump into T'Challa will have had a son. Now, that's rumor, so there's no guarantee it's going to happen, but the setting of Wakanda is going to be kept around for a long time, and that was one of the remarkable things. I mean, there's a lot of history that goes with Wakanda over the years in comic books, and I loved how Marvel Studios found a way to bring in all of the background and made it easy to understand. And part of that, of course, is that Black Panther has a huge role in Captain America Civil War. So we find out, who the Black Panther is, what it means, what Wakanda is. We briefly see Wakanda. We meet T'Challa. And so when we get the Black Panther movie, you don't have to spend 30, 35 minutes giving us the background of it, because we already have a good sense of it. Yep. We have that idea of this, Black Panther was a well-known character, but not outside comic books.
Right.
So, and years ago, there was going to be a Black Panther movie. There had been a plan for a Black Panther movie starring Wesley Snipes. And I think he could have done a kick-ass job in the role.
Sure.
Before he got into trouble legally for arguing that he shouldn't have to pay his taxes, which doesn't
tax evasion.
Yeah. But the studio put a stop to the Black Panther movie because they were afraid that people would get it confused with the Black Panther Party of the 1970s, which kind of seems like a silly reason. But then when I thought about it, it's like, well, the character of Black Panther is not, it's well known to comic book readers like Robin and myself, but to the general public, Black Panther doesn't have the familiarity of a Batman or a Superman or
did you know if that Black Panther movement, I mean, I just always assumed that they had read the comic book, even though, of course, right, it didn't have anything to do specifically with their agenda or anything. But I always assumed they'd read the comic book and they were inspired by it. But I don't know if that's true. I never corroborated.
I don't know. I'd have to look into Stan Lee's thoughts when he introduced I think Black Panther was introduced in the Fantastic Four during the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby run, but don't quote me on that.
Sure.
Yeah, try to keep history of comic books straight is like,
it takes a lot of time. Hey, separate question, but maybe an important one, and also for our audience as we try to think about these films. Throughout my lifetime as a fan of comics and pulp fiction in general, people often criticize the violence, right? That these films are built and predicated off of violence, off of war, and I have to admit, it does bother me a little bit, right? That there's a steady diet of to be a great hero means you have to defeat your opponent and increasingly kill them, right? I mean, in Logan and that does bother me. Maybe I'm just being old fashioned about my 1970 9 Superman but I do think that the medium struggles with how to deal with the issue of violence, and I don't want to again draw too much of a connection to some idiots on January 6th, but I just think, the vigilante, right? I mean, why do these people love the Punisher so much? Because he is a violent, right, murderous vigilante who was originally presented really as an anti-hero in the classic sense of the term. He has had some motivations you could understand, but the way he was going about doing things was repellent to Captain America, Daredevil, Spider-Man, Moon Knight, right? All of these other figures. But I mean, should parents or religious, I'm always opposed to these groups, the same sorts of groups that criticize violence in video games, but yet, whether it's violence in video games or violence in these comic book films, I do think it's an issue, and I do think it's something that bears consideration. What do you two think?
Well, I was just going to say that, of course, when it's exaggerated, it's a problem. And we know that children can imitate art and they can get hurt and things like that. So maybe, the more violent it is, the more PG it should be, that there should be ratings that prevent children without parents, or,
Sure.
all of that should be in place. But I think the need for watching or enacting violence will always be there, because, of course, to go back to why did ancient people have a story like Beowulf that they liked, which was a violent story of a hero killing a monster.
And it's rituals of violence.
And the explanation is always Aristotle, because it's the notion of catharsis, that rather than do something violent in real life, you watch it and you feel like you're letting out your emotions and in a healthy way. And also Freud was saying that that's a way to deal with your own fears, traumas, is to sublimate, meaning to express them in art, or either your own art or admire somebody else's art that helps you kind of purge those emotions. So I don't think that we should be worried about the violence itself. We should be worried if it, of course, it shouldn't be hijacked for purposes that are disturbing, right? Even what example I was going to give an example, and it's slipping my mind. Well, Robin and I teach, for example, a movie like Full Metal Jacket. So we all know the idea of war movies and anti-war movies, that even when somebody like Stanley Kubrick makes an anti-war movie, which is what Full Metal Jacket was, and it came after Vietnam, and it was pretty much to show the horror of that type of war and what it can do to people, and what it can do to people who go in the war and have to do things that they morally are opposed to. Anyway, that movie, we teach it to show, what can happen to a person's psychology when they're involved in something like that. But the same movie that it was made as an anti-war movie is used in the military, kind of to hype up people to, it's hardcore, let's go and enact it in another war. So you can't help what the audience will do with it. You can't plan. You can't account for every variable and how it will be used. So I don't think anybody should be worried about the Punisher being used. After all, it's just a character. If that's how they want to use it, it's not the fault of John Bernthal, for example, who was a really cool Punisher. And
he's an amazing actor.
It's problematic to be violent because he's playing it as a tortured soul and all that. But what other people get out of it, like, oh, Punisher, let's go to January 6th event as a Punisher.
I think
actor, it's their interpretation. You can't help it. It's not the fault of the character.
And I think what happens to villains should be is usually best storyline dictated. So, for example, obviously, you can't put Thanos into a jail. There's really a limit of what one could do with Thanos to limit him or make sure he never gets an Infinity Gauntlet again. Or Ultron, where there's really, really no choice to be made. Well, or in Shang-Chi, where the character had a choice to turn away but chose not to. The villain had a chance to turn away, but he chose not to. That when going back to Man of Steel, the ending where Kal-El kills General Zod. That was inspired by John Byrne run in the middle 80s, where he had a very memorable issue where Superman had gone to an alternate Earth, and the 3 Kryptonian villains had literally killed every single person on Earth. And they're saying, we're going to come to your Earth and do the same. And Superman has no choice but to execute them. He exposes them to that universe's kryptonite and kills them. But then it was served as a source of stories for many years as Superman dealt with that decision, that he acted as judge, jury, and executioner.
Right.
And I thought that was,
right?
it was done in an appropriate way to show consequences for that decision. But it was also a situation where he really didn't, the hero really doesn't have a choice. Because, you know, if you leave this thing, if you leave the person alive, the villain alive, they're going to come back and kill more. It's like the theme of Batman fighting the Joker. You know, why does Batman, you know, the Joker's, you know, is irredeemable. He's completely insane. He will never get better. Yet, and every time you put him away in Arkham, you know he's going to escape again. And he's going to go out and kill dozens more. And so it's that constant question, why doesn't Batman just take him out? You know, because he's repeated behavior over and over and over and over again. There's no hope of redemption. He's never going to stay in jail or in an asylum. And you know, that I think that's one of the reasons for the appeal of the Punisher, because the Punisher was created in an era where a lot of people who were victims of crime perceived that the justice system would protect the accused and the criminals far more than they would the victims. And so there was this idea of somebody
it was also literally much more violent at that time. I mean, there was just a lot more crime.
And it goes in cycles, you know, it goes in cycles, you know, and so there was this idea of somebody who would go and take care of business and kill those who could not be, who the police would not touch or were being protected by the system, and take them out. Yeah. There was an appeal in that. You know, Wolverine is also a very, very violent character. Not to maybe the extreme that the Punisher is, but people liked Logan a lot more, not essentially because it's a kick-ass attitude, but there was also a depth to Wolverine, that he was, I guess somebody once put it that Wolverine is what we'd be if we had superpowers. We go out there and kind of kick ass and have a good time, but you know, Wolverine has always, you know, grown as this character and had so many dimensions to him, especially, you know, with the, Chris Claremont, the brilliant work he did on X-Men and Wolverine, and then the Frank Miller written Wolverine miniseries that really deepened his character.
I hope they'll introduce the X-Men and use that storyline. I mean, it's pretty epic, right? The final showdown on the moon, right, where he has to kill Phoenix. That's pretty amazing. Yeah,
of course the only problem with doing the Dark Phoenix story again is that it's already been done twice. The last one. Well, I think Kevin Feige will be holding off on doing Dark Phoenix story for a while. Yeah, because I mean, it's been done a couple of times. The last time, quite badly. The X-Men are characters that I think they're taking a good approach of introducing them slowly, very slowly bringing them in, because. You know, these are major characters. And I think one of the mistakes Fox always made is that there were so many rich individual heroes available from the X-Men, but Fox never took advantage of that. It was always just like Wolverine, and that was it. Yeah. They never really ran with Storm or Nightcrawler or Deadpool was another one. But they never took these characters that have such a rich, individually strong background among the X-Men, like Rogue, for example, and really, you know, played up those individual roles. And I'm sure Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios are going to do that. And will they add the Eternals? Yeah, of course. That's going to be. There might not be another direct Eternal sequel, but the characters will reappear, some of them. naturally, because that's what part of the Eternals was supposed to do, was introduce these characters, but also the history of the Marvel universe. And they took a risk, and a lot of people didn't react well to it. But I remember that when earlier this year, when episode 9 of WandaVision was on, there was so much criticism of it. Now it's considered a classic. And it wasn't necessarily what people expected, but I thought it was a very effective ending for the story. And it was heartbreaking to see Wanda have to lose the Vision again, and understanding her background and why, how effectively it went from comedy in the early episodes to just complete tragedy at the end, and that made that tragedy so much more powerful. And
I gotta say, did you ever really buy? I mean, I do think it's a powerful story, and I liked what they did with it. But I never really bought the relationship between Vision and the Scarlet Witch. I mean, I kind of feel like these Marvel movies are not great with relationships, particularly.
Definitely.
You get to see a great, romantic engagement that actually would catch anyone's attention or take seriously. That's not to say I don't love a lot of these.
Not great either, except Superman and Lois are pretty cool couple. But
Sure.
I was just thinking how with Batman, the Christopher Nolan one, they kept trying very hard to have a love interest, but it was one of the weakest points in the movie. And I guess it's very hard to create love stories when the biggest interest is action and war, and I guess love falls to the side, and unless you try hard and you have somebody who knows what they're doing.
And that's one area where the comic books kind of have the advantage over the movies, is that the WandaVision relationship in the comic books was built up over years of time. And so by the time they did get together, it was acceptable and believable, but that was after years of development in the comic book stories. And with a visual format like a movie, that's a lot more difficult to do. But yeah, I did buy it. I could accept it that, Wanda felt like she was an outsider, and the Vision is an outsider, and he was there for her when she lost her brother, Pietro Quicksilver. And so, yeah, I could see that developing. It never really went as far as it could have, because they didn't have time to do that.
Yeah.
You had of course, Infinity War and Endgame really bringing that to an end. But I thought they did well talking about that in the TV series, that in the 5 years in between, characters like Captain America, the Hulk, Black Widow, Iron Man, those that weren't turned to dust, each dealt with what happened from Infinity War during that time. And I thought that was one of the brilliant things about Infinity War and Endgame. Like, each Avenger deals with it, like it has a different stage of grief and a different way they dealt with it. Captain America's essentially become a group therapist. Black Widow tries to control everything, even like, what can we do about this earthquake? It's an earthquake. You can't do anything about it. It's a natural occurrence. Bruce Banner merged himself with the Hulk to be able to control it. Iron Man got married.
I have to interrupt you just for a second. I have something to do that I have to leave, so I can't be here till the end. So I just apologize. I have to interrupt you for that, but thank you for making me part of this.
Thank you very much for joining us.
I have to go.
Okay, no problem. Bye. Okay. No, we're not all signing off. Just to one of us. Yeah, it's Iron Man begins a relationship with his, gets married and has children with Pepper. That's how he deals with it. Hawkeye goes bananas. He goes and he turns into a killing machine. I forgot who was I leaving out? Thor. Yeah, Thor. He goes off and he just lets himself go to hell. He's like party dude Thor, drinking and
fat Thor now, unfortunately.
Yeah, chubby Thor. But that's also a realistic reaction to great grief, that you basically throw yourself into, you just let yourself go to hell.
Sure.
Drink yourself into oblivion. And, when Wanda comes back in WandaVision, she mentions that, she didn't have time to grieve. She came back and losing vision was like, it was yesterday. Yeah. And then, she loses them again, in a very short time. And that was very telling that, the people who reappeared didn't have a chance to grieve. And I loved how they dealt with the idea of calling it the blip. I mean, it seems like it's trivializing it, but then when you think about it, how would people deal with something of that tremendous significance that would change the person's point of view of the universe and how it's run? That there's beings out there that can, at a snap of their fingers, wipe out half the life on Earth, and there's nothing you could do to stop it. That nothing, you could launch all the armies in the world and you couldn't have stopped it.
Yeah, we can barely handle the pandemic. What if half the population disappeared?
Yeah.
Right? Imagine what that would do to society. If they haven't even really tapped into the full horror of it. But I think that's a great point, that they actually went into people's reactions to that, right? And I think it worked, right? And they did it effectively.
Yeah. It's that's the idea that you don't the blip is something that's appropriate because how else would you deal with it? But at some point it's going to have to be dealt with. We saw part of that in WandaVision, where Wanda was like doing the same. You watch WandaVision, and one of the brilliant parallels is you look at her actions and they're like parallel to Thanos. Controlling people, making decisions for them.
Yeah.
She was she of course comes off better than Thanos, but at the end, there she is reading the Darkhold, a book of pure evil. And you can't use the Darkhold and there not be consequences. But that's what makes it brilliant, is that the characters have real world reactions. Like I loved Anthony Mackie's speech at the end of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where he's confronting the politicians saying, you guys need to deal with this. Just removing people from their home, you're doing like Thanos did.
Yeah.
And he talks to them, but he's not talking down to them. And I think that's one of the other things the Marvel films are so well. They don't. So many times when people try to deliver political messages and woke messages, it's like they're talking down to you. We're better than you. We're smarter than you. You listen to us. We're your cultural and intellectual superiors. I mean, we've seen that in the pandemic. There's some officials who talk down to people who, we're smarter than you. We're better than you. We know better than you. If we take the vaccine, we're better than you. But you talk down to people, you alienate them. We say, if you don't like your superhero, this superhero of color, you're a racist, bigot, or homophobe. Now, I have no problem with gay superheroes. I have no problems with lesbian superheroes. I don't like it when they tell cheap stories to do it.
Sure.
Where it's not communicated with a good story. It's like DC right now. It's like publicity stunt. oh, we're going to announce a Robin is bisexual. Superman is bisexual.
Right.
And
the marketing
this
tool.
is a far cry from like Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yeah.
Or The Dark Knight Returns from the 1980s, or Watchmen.
Yeah.
You know, and a transgender Amazon. When I first heard that, it was like, what? Because Themyscira is a island of all women. So if you had a transgender Amazon, wouldn't that technically mean that you would have an Amazon who wanted to become a man? Because, I mean, that would be the definition, wouldn't it? Yeah. And they give some explanation. Well, it's a male spirit who wanted to become a woman and is reborn on Paradise Island. So it's like, she's not even going to be a main character then? Is there even going to be a story around it? Or are they just going to be, oh, well, here we go, some lip service to a certain political cause. Move on now, we've done our jobs.
Well, I kind of hope, what they need is they need gay writers, right, and female writers, right, and transgender writers, and then maybe they'll actually get a story that reflects real human beings as opposed to a marketing ploy. I mean, I think that you can find people who can tell that story well. It's just trying to impose it on people as a gimmick isn't going to work.
It's when you just do a token story and then think, okay, we did the story, so check mark off, let's go. Come on, I was thinking about it. It would be interesting because on Themyscira you have an island of all women. Then they've been that way for thousands of years. What would happen if one of the Amazons wanted to become a male? I think that could actually be a pretty damn fascinating story.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
If they would actually run with it,
right,
and tell a complex story, but I don't think they will.
Right.
I mean, earlier this year, I gave up collecting DC comics, and it wasn't because it was before any of these announcements of the storyline. And I had been collecting DC comics for almost 35 years. I'm a hardcore legacy comic book reader. I still read Marvel and the Independents, but DC, the writing had gone downhill considerably, except for a few titles. The title prices had been increased, the quality wasn't there, and I finally just quit reading them. But I did not do so lightly. I mean, I've been collecting that DC for 35 years, for most of my life. I loved those characters, but the storytelling was just not there. The art was great, but it's bad storytelling. And you have to tell good stories. That's one of the things of the lasting contributions of the MCU, I think. The days where you could just put out cheap ass movies that were all effects and all blow up and nothing and brainless. Yeah, people can still enjoy those movies, but most of the audience, if it's going to last, you got to tell good stories. I mean, look at the Dune movie. My God, that was good. And it really, for the first time, takes the complexity of the Frank Herbert book and turns it in, puts it on the silver screen.
Yeah. And they took it seriously, right? They're not just trying to make a space movie. They try to do it of a complex film.
Tell good stories. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest legacies of the MCU is they're really, it's going to force Hollywood to tell good stories because that's, you have to do that now.
Yeah, part 2's coming out. I see Maria.
Yeah, well, and the audience is so fractured that, if you don't have an audience, you're not going to stay around. And yeah, not everybody's going to like every single movie. It's like not everybody likes Eternals. I'll go see it at some point soon. I suspect I'll probably like it because I know the background of the stories of the characters and so forth, and I like when they do something different. I think that's one of their strengths.
Characters in Marvel too, right? I mean, those Jack Kirby characters.
Yeah,
rules, right? That's some fun stuff. And I was surprised they even decided to make the movie. right? You know, I mean, they're kind of obscure characters in some respects, but.
Well, but that goes to the storytelling point. The Eternals are one of those ways that you could actually tell the history of the Marvel Universe, or begin to introduce that, and not have it be like some real long lecture or something.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
Okay, well, I mean, they're one of the few groups of characters that you could actually do that, tell a long-term story about the history of the Marvel Universe, and not just have it be, background information.
Yeah. I just thought maybe, right, because we had mentioned at the outset that we'd think about what people like Scorsese and all are saying about this, and I just thought I could read some of his comments, and also perhaps some in the audience are familiar with the comedian Bill Maher, who's also been pretty harsh on these films. Let's see. So Scorsese's comments are, he likens these movies to theme parks, and he says that that doesn't mean they're bad. They're fun. You get your explosions and your theme music, and so this is his verbatim, his comments. For me, for the filmmakers I came to love and respect, for my friends who started making movies around the same time that I did, cinema was about revelation, aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual revelation. It was about characters, the complexity of people and their contradictory and sometimes paradoxical natures, the way they can hurt one another and love one another and suddenly come face to face with themselves. It was about confronting the unexpected on the screen and in the life it dramatized and interpreted, and enlarging the sense of what was possible in the art form. And that was the key for us. So he's talking about the filmmakers that broke through in the 70s, which also includes George Lucas, the sort of the father of this Marvel universe in some respects, right? And that was the key for us. It was an art form. There was some debate about that at the time, so we stood up for cinema as an equal to literature or music or dance. Many of the elements that define cinema as I know it are there in these Marvel pictures. What's not there is revelation, mystery, or genuine emotional danger. Nothing is at risk. The pictures are made to satisfy a specific set of demands, and they are designed as variations on a finite number of themes. They are sequels in name, but they are remakes in spirit, and everything in them is officially sanctioned because it can't really be any other way. That's the nature of modern film franchises. Market researched, audience tested, vetted, modified, re-vetted, and re-modified until they're ready for consumption. And we've already kind of touched on, there's a lot here, and we've touched on some of these arguments that he's made. But I was just wondering, David, what do you think? I don't agree with several aspects of those comments, but I do think that it can be hard in these superhero films to get real emotional depth and complexity. But you just gave an example when you were talking about WandaVision of a story which I thought did have exactly those sorts of qualities that he's talking about. It's a pretty powerful story about a wife's grief, and I don't think that's a fair statement, really, overall.
Yeah, it's like I'm tempted to ask Martin, have you actually watched the films? Because I think everything that he described is already there. I remember going to see Avengers Endgame, and at 2 points of the film, there wasn't a dry eye in the house.
Yeah, I mean, it really seemed like it grabbed people's imaginations when I saw it. I was happy to see that, for a younger audience. Yeah.
What do you mean people don't react emotionally to it? When I show Avengers Infinity War and Endgame in my class, I inevitably hear sniffles from the background when we get to those two scenes.
Nebula, I think, is an awesome character, and those movies, that's powerful and interesting. She goes through a moral transformation. She becomes a better person, right? I don't think that's fair. I think that's a fair point. Has he seen all of these movies, or is he just kind of making a snap judgment? About.
I mean, I don't get what he's saying. These characters do have depth. I'm just like, I'm certainly not going to reject an opinion or trash Martin Scorsese and say he doesn't deserve that opinion. My God, he is one of the greatest directors of all time. So definitely.
Right. I mean, both of us, I'm sure, would agree, and I'm sure our audience would agree too. They are consumer products like McDonald's.
Yes.
They're designed to make people happy. They are like theme parks. You go there to have a good time. But to suggest that just because all of those things are true, that the films can't have artistic merit or can't really help us work through or have catharsis with our own problems, give us hope, right? Give us meaning in our lives even. I mean, certainly for me as a kid, that was true. I wrote an essay to get into Stony Brook back in New York that won me a scholarship, and it was about Spider-Man, right? And it was about how Spider-Man's tragic story gave me hope in my life to keep going despite some of the things that were happening. And I don't think that he's right on the emotional depth. I do think he's right about the consumer product, but that's true for a lot of.
But that's the nature of, what becomes great art at one point was popular culture. Shakespeare did not write his plays, so scholars 500 years from now would be discussing Shakespeare. Sure. He wrote his plays to make a living and for the audience.
Most of his audience was illiterate, right? They wouldn't have been able to read the play, right?
He did a damn good job of it, too. Edgar Allan Poe wrote his stories to make a living. Yeah. They were popular culture in their day. I mean, that's the nature of art. What is now considered art back in the day was popular culture. And it was being created by individuals who wanted to make a living through their artistic abilities. And if they could do it better than anybody else, more power to them.
Sure. Shakespeare always recycled stories. He plagiarized. A lot of students maybe don't know that. Those of you who are watching, we always say Shakespeare is this universal genius, but and he certainly was. I mean, he is, right? For me, as an English professor, but he was also a plagiarist. He also recycled a lot of stories. Right?
No, he took stories from history, put them together, and told them in a new way, and did it very, very well. That's the nature of entertainment. Sure. Is that for something to last, you have to attract an audience. It reminds me of the late critic Harold Bloom, who was at one point hosting a dinner with authors that are are considered great literary authors like Thomas Pynchon, Don DeLillo, and so forth. And he was saying to them at this keynote address that in 50 years, nobody would be reading their work or studying it. Rather, people would be studying Stephen King. Oh, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to see the look on those faces. All these high and mighty authors who write for an academic audience or an audience with PhDs, the artsy, the artistic crowd, the limousine crowd, the high culture crowd, to say to all of them, nobody will be reading you in 50 years. Stephen King will be the focus of attention. Oh, I would love to see the look on their faces.
But of course, I would still point out that, Stephen King and, Avengers Infinity War is not the same as Toni Morrison's Beloved or King Lear or The Canterbury. So we all, it's kind of apples and oranges. It's not really fair to compare comic book stories and that medium to those other art forms. To say that the comic book doesn't have any merit is not fair. But to suggest that somehow Stephen King should be put right up there with all of these other greats. I don't know. That's a debate, right? That's a fair debate. I certainly think Stephen King deserves as much credit as Edgar Allan Poe, and I give a lot of credit to Edgar Allan Poe. So.
Part of that is going to be the judgment of time. There were a lot of contemporaries of Edgar Allan Poe who are now completely forgotten that wrote works of great merit, but the judgment of time has been, that Poe has survived. Part of it is going to be the judgment of history and literature, and of course it's not this. Of course they're not the same. Certain works, indeed, of course, like Toni Morrison's Beloved, stand out and are at a level above. But but also, the Marvel comics reach a larger audience, and as does Stephen King. So if those works can be used to bring in people and say, hey, look at this great stuff that was written, but there's also this material that is also very good. It can open the doorway to people. I mean, I use a lot of Stephen King novels in my classes, and you won't believe how many times over the years I've been told, I never read a full book until I got into your class. I always consider that one of the highest compliments that they actually say. Yeah, that reading a Stephen King book, wow, reading isn't so bad after all. Or that, maybe looking at a comic book movie will get them into reading and thinking about more than just action.
Yeah, I came to love reading and storytelling from comic books, from Stephen King, from Dungeons and Dragons. And now those things are popular all over the world. When we were kids, right, there was a bunch of fringe nerd activities, right? Today they kind of dominate the cultural landscape, and that's a tremendous validation, right? And as you were saying, what's going to happen 50 years from now, I don't know, but I have a feeling that these characters, assuming society is still around as we know it, right? Will be in circulation, right? I mean. Think of the longevity of Superman, right, or Batman.
And I think the way that Marvel will make movies, who knows what will be stand out 50 years from now? But I suspect there will still be superhero movies. We're not going to go back to the point where it's just on the fringe anymore. Just like The Walking Dead and Stephen King and the horror it's a new golden age of horror storytelling, with great novels, great movies that are telling fantastic stories. You never know when you're going to watch history unfold. I watched Star Wars for the first time in 1977, and I knew, even at the tender age of 9, that nothing was ever going to be the same again. And Star Wars changed the way science fiction was perceived and how movies were made.
Yeah.
And then Iron Man came along and changed the way superhero movies were viewed, and changed the movie making in a way that's still being taking place. Who knows what things will be like, but you're seeing real stuff that is profound and deep, and there's works that will be more obscure but are equally justifiable looking at and watching. And hopefully people will be able to make that transition, because one of the great things about Beloved is it's a ghost story, it's a horror story.
That's right.
It's fantastic on every level. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning book that has a profound depth, but it's also a work of the horror genre.
That's true. Yeah, of course. That's a really good ghost story too, I think.
Yeah.
The best I've ever read.
Yeah, and it was difficult to make in a movie, because how the hell do you duplicate a first-person point of view of a ghost in a film? It's kind of tough, But
I wanted to bust out another quote at you. I'm sorry, finish what you said.
Okay, no, go ahead.
Well, it's just since we're fanboys, right? So we're fans of this stuff. So I most of you in the audience, if you like these films, you're probably on our side. But I just wanted to give another quote, this time from the comedian Bill Maher, where he's really trying to attack the people who like these things. So, this is after the death of Stan Lee, and, a lot of people, there were all these tributes pouring out for Stan Lee. And, he was, this comedian, Bill Maher, was criticized as being insensitive. So he responded to that in a blog post. He said, "I posted a blog that in no way was an attack on Mr. Lee, but took the occasion of his death to express my dismay at people who think comic books are literature and superhero movies are great cinema, and who, in general, are stuck in an everlasting childhood. Bragging that you're all about the Marvel Universe is like boasting your mother still pins your mittens to your sleeves. You can, if you want, like the exact same things you liked when you were 10, but if you do, you need to grow up." That was the point of my blog. I'm not glad Stan Lee is dead. I'm sad you're alive, right? By the way, if someone says you're being childish and you react by throwing a tantrum, you're not Iron Man, you're Irony Man, which I think is funny, right? I think it's a funny, I don't agree with him, but I think it's a funny comment. What do you think? I mean, as fanboys, and of course, another thing Bill Maher is trying to suggest is that a lot of these stories are just kind of oftentimes white male power fantasies, traditionally male power fantasies, currently, increasingly, occasionally female power fantasies, but that they're fundamentally childish and they don't really get to anything sophisticated in our identity or our lives. I don't agree with that, but like, what do you think? I thought it was a funny statement, though.
Yeah, I think part of what Bill Maher kind of does a lot of provoking, which he's a comedian. That's part of who he is.
But I think a lot of people do feel like him, right? They think that the people who care about these things, it's a little old-fashioned, but they think that the people who like these things are just kind of mentally immature and don't have the sophistication or ability to appreciate great art. I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. You can love Shakespeare and also like Iron Man. I mean, it's not a problem.
And that doesn't allow for the idea that storytelling within the comic book genre is constantly changing,
right,
and growing. It's like everybody. It would be like if comic books were still telling stories like they were in the 1960s. If they were, they probably wouldn't exist anymore. But comic book storytelling has grown up.
Yeah.
It tells different stories. It's grown. Does it have periods where the storytelling is better than others? Of course.
Sure.
That's the nature of any genre. I mean, my God, in the 1990s, Marvel had to declare bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Because, they weren't telling really good stories, and it was all art, no storytelling. And then, 10 years later, Disney buys them for $4 billion. They turned it around. Storytelling evolved to say, well, if you like what you liked when you're 10 years old, you haven't grown up. That's saying that art never changes, that storytelling never changes.
Yeah.
I mean, through the 1970s, the 1980s, the nature of comic book storytelling was changing. Sometimes Marvel did it, sometimes DC did it, sometimes independents did it. It would vary. You would have titles that played it safe, but then you would have titles that really took risks, like Watchmen or Alan Moore's Swamp Thing or The Dark Knight Returns. Marvel Knight's Daredevil, Frank Miller's Daredevil. The storytelling changes and grows, and sometimes it's really good and brilliant, like Neil Gaiman's Sandman. Other times, not so much.
Yeah, everyone
but
should
to
check
say,
out. I've never read it.
To not allow for any growth, You mean people that write Pulitzer Prize writing novels are writing like they did in 1900? Of course not. That's silly to say. It'd be like, no, we can't use cell phones anymore because we want to go back to rotary phones. I mean, technology advances, storytelling changes and advances. You know, when you say that you can't like stuff that you did when you were 10 years old, why not?
Check that out of hand. That's ridiculous. To me, that's not a great attitude. I was never one of these people who just wanted to bury my toys in the backyard. I liked all the things that I liked as a kid. I still like most of them, but I mean, again, right? Spider-Man isn't King Lear, but they're different issues.
Now, if you're 50 years old and you're still the only books you read are still Dr. Seuss, that's a different story. I mean, okay, now that would be, okay, you got a point. I mean, if the highlight of your day when you're 65 years old is watching Sesame Street, and that's all you've ever watched as an adult, okay, that's your choice. But, I mean, people's tastes change, but, and the examples I listed, like Sesame Street, of course it's still aimed at children. That's the point of the program. It's always going to be for children. And we outgrow it. And they were still nostalgic. I still like once in a while seeing, it's Bert and Ernie, cool.
Of course.
Because, there's that nostalgia there. But to say that, art forms can't change is preposterous.
Yeah, and I think you made a great point before. Maybe not everybody sees it this way, but certainly the fans of the genre do. It's such a mutable genre. It's true. If I go back to Spider-Man in 1969, am I going to be offended by how it represents probably minorities, women? Yeah, right. But if I look at Spider-Man in 2021, it's a more engaging, interesting reflection of the society, like any art that's a product of its time. Yeah. And I think maybe the superhero story has that kind of universal quality. That's why people always compare it to mythology. I mean, it's modern mythology, and I think you can use that modern mythology to tell really human and powerful stories that inspire people. And that, to me, if that's not the value of art on one fundamental level, I don't know what is, right? I mean, that's the purpose. That's why I wanted to read. That's why I became an English professor.
Yeah, it's kind of silly to say, that storytelling can't possibly change. That's ludicrous. I mean, that'd be like saying, well, you compare Jack Kirby's art example to Todd McFarlane's or a lot of artists today. Jack Kirby's art looks extremely primitive and bad, but then you tell people, but comic books in that era, it was quantity that you had to do as well as quality. That if you were going to make a living being an artist, you had to draw a lot of comic books. You didn't have time to just do one 22-page story per month. If you were going to make a living, you had to do 8 or 9 22-page stories per month. And so, hey, you had to draw it, and you had to draw it fast. But as comic books evolved, artists were able to take their time more.
Yeah. And
art evolved. But you have to understand the times in which these things were created. And so, is the 1969 Spider-Man going to tell a different story than 2021? Of course it would.
Of course. But
society was a lot different in 1969 than it is in 2021. Yeah. And certainly things, are definitely bad. Some things get eliminated from storylines that should have been eliminated a long time ago. Like offensive racist language and so forth, and certain depictions of characters. Nobody in their right mind would depict, for example, African Americans as they were depicted in popular culture in the 1940s. That kind of stuff, the use of blackface is completely unacceptable now.
Sure.
And justifiably so. Yeah. But things are a product of the time that they are written. And yes, people should be held to account for their points of view during the time, but we should also acknowledge that they're a product of the time they were in. For example, Chaucer has grotesquely anti-Semitic stuff in the Canterbury Tales. But he lived in a time where anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish belief was widely accepted and considered to be a positive thing. Now we look at that and we're horrified, but that's a product of the time.
You can try to engage the issue of anti-Semitism through by
It's like, H.P. Lovecraft has.
Oh yeah,
I love his work. He was one of reading his stories really formed my interest in focusing on horror. But the man had horrific points of view on race. Sure. But it was a product of his time. Yeah. He held points of view that a lot of people had during his time. That doesn't excuse it. That's just saying that
the average. I read one of his his diary entries where he said he moved to the other side of the street so he wouldn't have to walk next to a Asian person. That's how
it's bad.
Like him, but yet I still think he's worth reading, not because of the racist elements, but because of some of the other quality of his sort of cosmic horror.
Yeah, and to acknowledge that this is part of how he told stories. It's not a good part of it, but to understand that just because he had a racist attitude doesn't mean that he was running off and joining the Ku Klux Klan or participating in lynching. We need to, we also need to see that there's different levels of, these type of issues. And so, for example, when Mark Twain, when this constantly pops up, Mark Twain was racist because he has the N-word in Huckleberry Finn. Yet you look at the characters who are saying it in Huckleberry Finn, they're all idiots and morons, and they're all racists in the South. He's reflecting the time in which the story is set. And to not, understand that there's differences in different types of racism, and we should look at those. And yes, do we reject them? Of course we do. But we need to understand that just because if we reject all the work because they had some kind of bad bias in them, nobody would be reading or watching or listening to anything.
Yeah, that's like maybe too woke, right?
Yeah,
and that's the cancel culture problem in a nutshell, right?
On steroids, there's going to be things that people do that and say that are bad, but and sometimes one might choose not to read or listen to certain things after a particular artist does something extreme, or if they offend you to the point where you don't want to listen to them or watch them. That's fine. That's an individual choice. But to say, I'm not going to watch anything by any music done by liberals, I'm not going to be listening to anything then. Because I'm going to be missing out on a whole hell of a lot. Or because Stephen King agrees with liberal philosophies, I'm not going to read him anymore. Right. Well, they'll say goodbye to one of my favorite authors then.
That's kind of getting confusing. Like political thought is one dimension of human experience and an important one. I'm not discounting that, but it's not the only way to look at any of these pieces. I mean, I see a lot of comic book art as like Parable or like the old mystery and morality plays. They can sometimes, give us powerful warnings, right, about the nature of our society or where it's going. Like you mentioned Dark Knight Returns earlier. That's a graphic novel that had a huge impact on me. It was the first time I'd ever seen Superman, who I grew up with as the ideal hero, turned into kind of a dupe and an oblivious, lackey of a corrupt conservative. It was sort of a Reagan America criticism of conservative society. And it was really powerful, and it made me think about the issue. Of course, Superman may not be real, but America's power as a unipolar entity in the world is very real. And the story is about that, and the privileges of power and what it means to exert that power on other people when they disagree with you, and I think, it was really powerful for me as something to think about. And I don't think anyone would say, oh, Dark Knight Returns is political philosophy, but it certainly opens up a can of worms, right? About society, totalitarianism, and I think Batman's resistance, which of course got played up in the more recent movie, they sort of borrowed some pieces from this graphic novel. Batman's resistance to Superman is an interesting, like the everyman, the guy who doesn't have any powers, versus a person who is a god. And I think that there's something in that story that has a lot of pathos. I mean, it's not easy to dismiss, right? It's worth considering whether Superman's real or not. Power is real in the world, right? And power struggles are real. And
with the classic,
help me think about it. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, and with like Spider-Man, with great power must come great responsibility.
A lesson he learns the hard way, right? As you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, but also how does one exercise that power? What are the consequences of those powers? What if Watchmen? A complete taking apart of the superhero genre, but it told such a great story.
The Boys,
The Boys,
right?
too.
Which gives you like the most evil and twisted version of
Superman.
I think The Boys is an interesting satire. Of course, it does reflect pretty dark attitudes of this time period, right? But I still think it works.
And I still think it's funny that The Boys was originally published by DC, but then they kind of realized, wait a minute, that guy is like a pedophile Superman. What? Get rid of this title. Like, dude, did you not read the title before you published it?
They have to be a little careful about what they include for that show.
I noticed that we're getting to noon, and we could probably keep on going another 5 hours because there's so much to discuss. But I would say that we've had a great presentation, a great exchange of ideas, talked about this, and so we'll hopefully pick up this again next semester. I'm going to,
This is a subject I love. It was a real pleasure to talk to all of you. I'm sorry, a lot of you are just sort of faceless entities out there, but it's worth taking the time to think about this art form. And thanks for coming to support us. I appreciate it.
And I think we're going to. I'm hoping that we'll be able to do one of these meetings every semester and talk about aspects of comic books and comic book movies. And next time we might go.
That's where we live. That's how we relax, right? You may go to class and study, Canterbury Tales. I love studying Canterbury Tales. I like teaching Canterbury Tales, but I also want to go see Eternals. Right?
And I like teaching Stephen King, but I also like reading Stephen King and The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones and all of that.
Of course.
And next time we'll probably do a more focused topic than the freewheeling one here, but there's so much material to cover. And we'll have all kinds of new stuff to look at. Because maybe by the time we have this again, Spider-Man No Way Home will be out, and we will have a live-action Spider-Verse. And probably Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness won't be out yet, but we'll be able to look at, and maybe the new Batman will be out, and we'll be able to see.
It looks amazing. I mean, I like that new Batman trailer. Dark. Pretty cool. I think it's going to be a good year for superhero movies. That's for sure. There are a lot of them coming out, and there's a lot of anticipation about them.
The only fear I have about the new Batman movie is that it's from Warner Brothers, and
Oh, Robert Pattinson. I wasn't sure, but I actually think he looks pretty cool. Like my reservations about Twilight notwithstanding, sparkly vampires never really did it for me. But I'm looking forward to seeing this Batman.
I remember the same damn thing being said about Michael Keaton, and now Michael Keaton is the Batman. But I remember it's like, oh my God, Michael Keaton is Batman. This is impossible.
He was great as Batman. I love and he's a great actor, right? And I think he's finally gotten the validation he deserves, But people ribbed him for being in that movie, but he was good in it. I mean,
he was perfect.
I didn't think he was a good choice either, and then he turned out to be an amazing choice.
Yeah, well, I always remember that if I think somebody's not a good choice. Now, some choices are kind of scary. Like there was going to be a Nicolas Cage Superman. At one point, there was talk about casting Jim Carrey.
I saw this.
Jim.
Yeah, look it up. Those of you who've never heard of it, go check it out.
Yeah, there's actually a full-length documentary about it called Superman Lives. It's a fascinating documentary.
Like Superman they revealed an acid trip. It's very strange.
Yeah.
Art.
Yeah, and at one point Tim Burton was supposed to direct it, and he left. But they at one point they were talking about Jim Carrey playing Brainiac.
That doesn't sound like it would work, but who knows, right? I think Jim Carrey's going to.
Yeah, I know, but isn't
Jim Carrey going to play MODOK? I read something about it. Yeah,
I can imagine MODOK doing his voice, but it's just difficult to imagine Jim Carrey as Brainiac.
I think some of you students are asking about extra credit.
If you need to know how to get the extra credit, just email me or Blackboard message me saying that you attend. That's all you have to do. I'll going by the honor system, which maybe not the best idea, but okay. Oh well.
We're talking about heroes, so if you want to be a hero in your real life.
Well, it's easier than trying to keep track of everything. I certainly would be trying to get everybody's and write down everybody's name as they signed in or signed off.
Of course.
Yeah. But thank you everyone for coming. Well, thank you for attending. We hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Robin, for joining me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks a lot, David. Thanks for inviting me and Liana. We enjoyed it. And these are just fun things to talk about. Once you get
and it's nice
whether it has academic relevance or not, which I certainly think you've at least made a case for. Right?
Well, and I think it's nice to show everyone that that academics can be taught through the use of popular culture.
Yeah.
That that the two are not mutually exclusive. That the power of learning can be done through these popular culture items, and I think that's some of the things that are just absolutely wonderful about it.
Yeah.
And I wish that the academic community would do more of, because we can reach people like that.
Yeah, and it makes me sad, right? And I think it bothers you too. That's why we wanted to do it, because it's depressing as professors, as people who teach things that are already considered by consensus to have value. We want to expose people to other ideas, other concepts, other forms of art. And you should enjoy your learning. You should have a love of reading, of storytelling. Comic book stories can help you to do that, and certainly those are the first kinds of stories a lot of people read, and looking down on them is not reasonable to me, right? I don't agree with that. I mean, you can turn up your nose at it, but maybe you're just not trying to pay attention to the way this art form works. Or like with Stephen King. I mean, I love seeing Stephen King's tremendous success today, as you said. He deserves it. I mean.
Although I admit,
crappy books and stories too, right? But he has some great stuff. Like anybody who's put out a lot of stuff. Right?
Although I sometimes I feel my age when I heard people on YouTube talking about print comics as floppies. It's like, oh God, I feel old.
Sadly, nothing. We're not the Eternals. So
it's like, oh my God, we're referring to comic books now as to like the way we used to refer to floppy disks for computers. Oh Oh, well.
Well, hey, again to the crowd, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. You know, if I'm back teaching in person next semester, hopefully I'll see some of you. You know, but yeah, it was a real pleasure. Thanks again, David.
Yep, thank you. And this is Dr. David Oakes signing somewhere. And this video I'll forward to everybody who was from my classes, and maybe I can send it to Liana, can put it on YouTube again.
Oh yeah,
in case.
Send it to her. Yeah.
And hopefully this time won't be 1.5 gigabytes of data.
I'm sure it'll be
okay.
Fine. Take care.
Yeah, this is Dr. David Oakes signing off. Thank you for coming, everybody.